Color is one of my favorite art topics, and an essential one, so here are 10 things you can try to improve your use of color in your art. It's easy to find yourself using a fairly consistent color palette in all of your work, and while that isn't necessarily a problem, it's also nice to become comfortable with branching out. One way to find combinations of colors that you wouldn't otherwise consider is using a random color palette creator. I'll include a link to one of these in the description. This is a great starting point that you then have the option to add to, subtract from, and tweak however you want. My second recommendation is to use photographs. What I like about this option is that they come with so much subtle color variety to work with, instead of just flat colors that you would get from a simple palette. Whatever picture you use for color reference doesn't have to relate at all to the subject of your art, and it can be fun to take inspiration from a picture that is completely unrelated. You also don't need to limit yourself to the exact colors of a reference. Instead, you can cut out and piece together parts of different pictures, and then experiment with color adjustments and painting on top of it. Now you have a thumbnail reference that you can pull your colors directly from. Next, I want to talk about controlling the saturation of your colors. The scale of saturation can be split into 3 categories. Saturated colors are the most vivid and pure, without much white, black, or gray mixed into them. Because they're so strong, it's generally best to avoid making them the majority, instead used only to add punches of color in select places, or left out entirely. Muted colors are colors that exist around the middle region of a color picker, and the range of what is considered muted can be pretty wide. Finally, there's chromatic grays, which are close to pure gray but have a slight amount of saturation. For an illustration, design, or really anything, a pleasing ratio will mostly be made up of muted and chromatic gray colors. That doesn't mean you can't make a great looking illustration with mostly saturated colors, but for most styles and circumstances, it's better to avoid that. Related to that, very saturated colors aren't a requirement to make something look colorful. It's common for beginners especially to feel like their art would look dull without them, but muted colors can also look vibrant on their own, and are more realistic to the level of saturation you tend to see on bright, colorful objects in real life. It's also much easier to create a cohesive looking color palette with more muted colors because they're closer together on the color wheel. In other words, the grayer your color palette is, the easier it is to add a wide range of hues that still look good together, which creates a unique sense of colorfulness that doesn't require saturation. I find it easy to overthink my colors when I'm planning a full design or illustration, so sometimes I'll do small thumbnail paintings where I don't think about much else. They can be somewhat representational, like a landscape, or completely abstract. This is not only good practice, but also a potential resource for you later on. Maybe you're working on an illustration and find a color thumbnail that you've done in your practice time fits it really well. Light and shadow are very much overlapped with color, and so in many cases you need to consider both at the same time. Most important is that there should be some sort of color temperature or hue difference between areas in light and areas in shadow. For example, here the light is a coolish gray, and the shadows are very orangey warm. A lot of people will naturally pick their light colors maybe around this zone, and then when they get to their shadows, they travel down to this zone, making the shadows more desaturated than the light. This isn't bad, but sometimes your shadows can look unintentionally dull or muddy. Don't forget that you also have the option to travel this way, giving your shadows more saturation instead of less. This is what I prefer doing most of the time, both for painting and cel shading, mostly because I just like the way it looks. A quick way to unflatten your areas of color and make them a bit more interesting is with color jitter. You can be manually changing the hue as you paint, or using color jitter brushes. Especially for grays, more hue variety gives them more life. Like I mentioned in the 4th tip, all chromatic grays fit together cohesively, so you can make your grays look quite colorful by giving them a full rainbow of hues. It's not difficult to find good material to study. You can look at your favorite artists or photography, and movie stills especially have a lot to learn from. Cinematography implements color to create a mood and enhance the story being told, something that you can also do in still illustrations. There are massive databases out there where you can choose a movie, pick a still with interesting lighting and color, and then do a quick painting of it, recreating the colors best you can before resorting to your eyedropper. One of the most common mistakes is using colors that are each too distinct from one another, and so don't feel like they belong together. Other than just making some of your colors more muted, you can also try using blending modes. Make a new layer, fill it with a unifying color you want the palette to lean towards, maybe lower the opacity, and then experiment with the effects that setting this layer to different blending modes creates. This is similar to something traditional painters will do, which is mix in a bit of a unifying color into each color of their palette to make them more related. My last tip is another one about lighting, but specifically about considering environment and time of day. The range of options you have is very wide, and instead of using the same lighting type again and again, you can branch out to try something like the soft gray colors of a foggy morning, or under streetlights at night. I used to do mostly sunny weather colors because I felt it just looked better than any alternative, but don't underestimate how cool and interesting the alternatives can be, and how effective these color options are for creating different tones or mood. Here's a couple of related videos you could watch next. Thanks for watching!